is that as long as we increase our consumption and continue to increase our consumption, the price will be higher. If we decrease our consumption, the price will be lower. It'll be a win-win for everyone. So this is what I'm advocating, is that we greatly increase by setting much more ambitious goals than we are now. In Vermont, we have 39 megawatts, which is 3%. That's all. And yet we're bragging about it. I don't think there's anything to brag about. I think it's a baby step. Germany is producing more than half of its electricity from solar PV. The United Kingdom doubled in 1 year.
Can we do it without subsidies?
It's being done without, listen, coal, they're all being subsidized. Nuclear is being subsidized. They're all, so it's not, you know, to be on a level playing field, and to be fair, everything is being subsidized, but actually the cost of solar PV has come down 90% in the past 10 years because the Chinese went into mass production. That's why. Now, MIT did a study, which is on my website, showing that it isn't the cost of labor so much that allows the Chinese, but the economies of scale when you get into mass production, which was predicted by Amory Lovins 30 years ago. So, you know, does that answer your question?
Another question. That's why we let you go.
I'm glad you got me on a roll here, because there's so much of this energy issue that
I know this is a question near to your heart. Last call on Mr. Donkin. Did you want? No, you're all set.
I'm also an independent candidate.
All right, Mr. Bill. As a matter of fact, it's 8:30, and if you are just joining us, my name is Joe Marone, and this is Vermont PBS, and this is the United States House of Representatives debate among the 6 candidates on the ballot from Vermont. If you are into Twitter, the hashtag is hashtag VPPOLI, VTPoly, and there's a great discussion going on right there. You may want to watch online and tweet at the same time. It's the way to do it these days. Anyhow, I'd like to go back to another email question from one of our viewers. I believe it's very pertinent to this time of year. College is back in session. Robert Cummings lives in South Burlington, and he writes, I am a recent college graduate, and while I worked while in school and helped pay costs along the way, I still now owe almost $50,000 in loans. There's been much debate about interest rates, but I feel that it's just one symptom of the overall problem of the cost of higher education in general. Help. Robert wants help. Mr. Welsh.
Well, Robert is right. I mean, he speaks for all of Vermonters and Vermont students and Vermont parents. I mean, the gateway to the middle class and to economic opportunity is a higher education. But if you graduate from college with the millstone of this huge debt, bigger than, in many cases, mortgages that their parents had, that's going to hold you back. So I think there's 3 things that you have to do. One, we do have to lower interest rates. You know, the government is borrowing money now at about 2.5%. Yet students and parents are paying, in some cases, 6 to 8%. Why in the world don't we let them refinance at the lower rates that are available to government? That would save them like $3,000 or $4,000 over the life of the loan. Second, we've got to work with our college administrators to try to keep the tuition increases down or eliminate them. And Trey Gowdy and I, conservative Republican, passed a bill about giving regulatory relief in exchange for giving some tuition relief. And then third, there's a tradition of supporting students with grants and to some extent loans. The Stafford loans, named after Vermont's Senator Stafford and Claiborne Pell. So all of those 3 things have to be a part of making college affordable.
Mr. Andrews is going to jump over to you.
Oh, okay.
Affordable college.
Yeah.
Robert I'm sorry to interrupt. Robert says it's more than just the loans.
Right. Well, it definitely is. Right. It sounds like Robert's on the right track. And, you know, we have a really a narrow political debate in this country. But just like healthcare, we ought to be looking at what the rest of the world does, where they have publicly funded education. You know, education benefits society. We're not a poorer country by paying for education. We're actually a wealthier society. It is a wonderful investment to having a highly skilled workforce to fund education. So I think we need to do more than playing around with interest rates. That's just nibbling at the corners of what really needs to be done. If we look just over our border to the north, Canadian students had massive protests and strikes to prevent relatively modest fee hikes in their education system, and they won by doing that. So I think that we need to be thinking about ways to support education. That it was Noam Chomsky said, you know, a loan debt is really a form of social control. It's a way to keep a docile workforce, and we need to think about relieving people of that burden so that we can so that people will be free to be citizens in this country.
Mr. Trudell, high cost of education.
We used to have more affordable education. Colin Powell, who is the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, went to City University of New York because it was publicly funded. That was the only way he could afford it. California had a nicely publicly funded system, which, you know, we're going backwards here. You're right that the rest of the world has affordable college education because we invest in education there. We don't invest here. We turn it into a profit-making system devoid of the public interest. So why not invest in America, invest not only in our public educational system at the lower but at the higher levels? We're the poorest rich country in the world. I have to say I agree with you. This is what we need to do, is to invest in our future. It's a good investment in education. So let's start investing substantially instead of these piecemeal solutions with interest rates. And on that note, I'd like to say, if we want to lower interest rates, let's lower them to the prime rate that banks loan to each other. You know, let's if you want to get down to it, the banks, you know what the prime rate is? That's the rate that the bank loans to each other to make quick money on overnight loans.
Okay, going to move over to Mr. Donker. Mr. Donker on high cost of higher education.
Well, this is something that's really near and dear to me because I put 2 daughters through college and I'm still paying for them. One's 30, one's 27. One went to UVM and one went to a college in Mass. Yes, we should. I mean, the interest rates are obscene. We shouldn't be charging them any kind of near the amount of the interest rates. Money is cheap right now. We need to get after it. But the biggest problem is we're graduating these students. They're starting out their lives hoping to get into the middle class where they can be comfortable and move ahead or better. And they can't do it because they have this huge loan. We need to cut tuition. Tuition has raised over 1,000% faster than the cost of living in the last 30 years. You know, that's where the problem is. When you graduate, like the gentleman who called in the call, you graduate with a $50,000 debt. That's a huge thing to have around your neck to have to deal with. We have to start cutting it. My idea is a 10% cut in college tuition every year for 3 years if they are taking federal monies. Any college or university, they have to start cutting. Put the onus on them. Make them start to tighten their belts.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Meyer.
This is, cuts a little close to home here. In the year 2000, I don't really pay attention to any of the Democrats and Republicans anymore. In the year 2000, I figured my choice was between Ralph Nader or Charles Darwin. I voted for Charles Darwin. And I voted for Kerry out of fear of Bush, and I voted for Obama out of fear of whatever the Republican traitors would give. I'm not voting out of fear anymore. The $20K that I owe allegedly, I've told my alleged student loan servicer that I thought they were criminals, and I cited chapter and verse of the United States Code, and I asked for a supervisor, and nobody gave me anything, so I told them I'd see them in court. I don't recommend that, but I just called them criminals. I've written everybody. I've written the EEOC. I've gone everywhere looking for work. It's just useless. So after 10 years, I just told them, see you later. So I actually have a question for the Democrats and Republicans. What's 30% of zero for? What's 30% of zero for a low tax rate?
Time is
and what's
up.
40% of zero?
Mr. Meyer, I'm going to hold you on the time. Chris Erickson, last call on high cost of education.
Salary times 10 years.
$200,000. Next time.
That's what's stolen from me.
And we learned how to keep time in 3rd grade, I believe.
Yes,
Mr.
executive in jail.
Randall, be quiet. I'm Chris Erickson. I firmly believe that any state college or university that is receiving taxpayer dollars should be required to videotape every single classroom and put it for free on the internet for anyone who wants to watch it. And then if anyone feels that they learned something from watching a series of classes, a whole entire course of classes, they should be allowed to go to a state police station and request to take an exam to prove that they learned everything in the class, and then have it marked on their driver's license that they completed and learned all the requirements for that class.
Thank you very much. We've got about 8 minutes before we get to the closing statements. And I have a section of questions that I'm calling for 30 seconds at the most for your answers. But if you can be shorter than that, I can get to more. So it's up to you. Laura will keep you on 30 seconds, but feel free to be short. We'll go down the line, starting with Mr. Andrews. Is it time to end the embargo of Cuba?
Absolutely. This is a really important issue. I think that it shows just how punitive the United States government can be when governments don't cooperate with them. The Cuban government does not pose any threat to the United States, and I think that Cuba is actually a model in terms of its health care and the way that it takes care of its citizens, the way it's fought poverty over there, with the way it's economized, is actually a model that we should be looking to in many ways.
Mr. Donker.
I don't have any problem with lifting the embargo. I don't see where Cuba is a threat to us in any way right now. So as far as I'm concerned, the embargo, it seems ridiculous. You know, open it up, let us trade with them, and see where it goes from there.
Chris Erickson.
Yes, end the embargo on Cuba.
Very good. Randall Meyer.
Sure.
Indeed. Thank you. Jerry Trudell.
I heard that Cuban cigars were really good.
I would take that as a yes, then. Mr. Welsh.
We should definitely end the embargo. Our ability to influence Cuba and the ability of the Cubans to influence their government, I believe, would be enhanced if we ended the embargo. Cuban citizens are repressed by their government. They do have a good health care system. You're right about that, but they don't have the civil liberties they deserve. But I do think ending the embargo would be good for the Cuban people as well as for the American economy.
Mr. Meyer, we'll start with you. Edward Snowden, hero, villain, should he be allowed back in the United States?
I've been up and down on both of them. I think I'm siding with hero. I think they ought to invite him back and give him a nice retirement community and some dark shades and sunglasses so people don't bother him.
Chris Erickson, Edward Snowden.
Villain. I was trained to believe that loose lips sink ships.
Jerry Trudell.
I think we should give awards to whistleblowers instead of turning them into criminals.
Mark Donker.
I don't believe he's a villain, but I also think that if he did give out any secrets that had to do with our military and hurt our country in any way, he should be accountable to that. But I'd like to see him come back and answer to that.
Very good. Mr. Welsh.
I kind of agree with what Mark said. I mean, he let us know things that we should have been told in the first place. There's too much secrecy in government. And when there was this massive NSA spying, that should have been a policy that was debated before it was imposed. So, in fact, the information that he gave us is information we're entitled to. On the other hand, there is a question about whether there were some legitimate secret information that was included in it.
They always say that, though. They
true.
use that, that's
Last, Mr. Andrews, I believe we haven't done that.
Yeah, Edward Snowden, I think, is a hero, and I think everybody should be checking out what WikiLeaks has been putting out. As Peter says, the government is wildly over-secretive, and if people knew, like in Tunisia, where people read what was coming out on WikiLeaks thanks to the disclosures of Chelsea Manning, Edward Snowden, and others, there'd be a revolution in this country. People wouldn't tolerate it. And, yeah.
I'll stay right with you, Mr. Andrews. Should there be a sales tax imposed on online purchases?
I'm against any tax that tends to burden low-income people. I think that we need to be taxing the rich. So I'm against any any sales tax, whether it's online or not.
Mr. Donker, we're going to go this way.
I don't really agree with the online tax. I've talked to some smaller business owners that run online businesses, and their concern is how onerous it would be for them to try to keep up with 50 states. And then you have, inside each state, you have cities that have city taxes and whatnot. So I think it would be very difficult for these small businesses that are running out of their own houses or whatever on their computer. So I don't agree with it.
Chris Erickson.
During my married years in California, I briefly worked for Walt Disney Books by mail. And you can easily make 200 calls a day, computer assisted, because the computer's dialing for you and the computer tells you the age of the child and what book the child wants at that age. And you're selling hundreds and hundreds of books a day. And yes, there are some states that you can't charge tax and some states that you can, but the computer takes care of that.
Mr. Meyer.
I don't buy anything because of 10 years of wage theft, ostracism, and censorship, which is a issue that's very near and dear to my heart. I don't mean to draw you into this, but you did make a comment about third grade. I do know what the bell means. The bell means stop. There's no bankruptcy, by the way, for you can't claim bankruptcy for student loans. So it takes a lot of courage to tell those bastards where to go and how to get there.
Very good. Mr. Trudell, online purchases, should we tax it?
Well, Mr. Congressman Welsh, the only specific economic proposal he has is for an online sales tax. So he does support it. I don't, for two reasons. Number one, I don't think we should tax consumers anymore for any reason. We need to jumpstart the economy. The second reason is because of the thing that various congressmen are paying a lot of lip service to, which is global warming. We can reduce our carbon footprint by more online shopping and less driving. So encouraging online shopping is a good thing. So we don't tax consumers more. So I'm against an online sales tax.
Mr. Welsh?
Well, what I believe in is that there's got to be a level playing field, whether you're an internet retailer or you're a brick and mortar retailer. And the way it works right now in Vermont, if you buy a book at a local bookstore, that owner of the bookstore has to collect the sales tax. If you buy that book online, you're supposed to pay the tax. This is not a new internet sales tax. It's the Vermont sales tax that would be collected by the internet retailer. So it's not a new tax, it's a due tax. And I think it's absolutely essential to our downtowns that they at least have the opportunity to have a level playing field and not a competitive disadvantage.
Thank you. Quickly, Chris.
Okay,
Very
you
quick.
understand how people make zillions of dollars on the internet. Walt Disney Books by mail, 200 telemarketers in one room, making 200 calls a day. Sure, the Walt Disney Books by mail, you know, they're geared to each age for each child. But if you're charging 25 cents tax on each sale, and you got 200 telemarketers selling 200 books a day each for 25 cents tax, that's a lot of money for the government. The government can't give that up.
So we've got 5 no taxes and 1 yes. Thank you, candidates all. And now we're at the point of the program where we have a 1-minute closing from all of you. You drew numbers when you checked in. And the first is Matthew Andrews.
Thank you. It's been a great debate. I wish we had more time to delve into these issues. I think my goal in being in this race is about giving voters a real choice. One of my inspirations is Eugene Debs, who was the most popular socialist candidate for president in U.S. history. And he said, if I could lead you to socialism, then somebody else would lead you back out. So I think it's really, really important. I want to motivate people to feel that they have power over government. Government should fear the people, not the other way around. And I'm also inspired by Henry David Thoreau, who said, I have great faith in a seed. Convince me that you have a seed there, and I'm prepared to expect wonders. I think Liberty Union is that seed. I think that another world is not only possible, but it's necessary. If we're going to have real solutions to the crises like war, poverty, climate change, we have to stand up and organize independently of the Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews. Number 2 is independent Jerry Trudell.
First of all, I think it is time to give Congress a good, swift kick in the pants, to send them a powerful message that this dysfunctional body needs to wake them up. It's time for an economic revolution in this country. It's time for a transaction tax on Wall Street to reinvest in America, to rebuild the poorest rich country in the world. Our bridges, our roads are falling apart. We need to reemploy people who were laid off in the public sector, which includes policemen and firemen. This is about public safety and common sense, for God's sake, as well as our sake. So check out JerryTrudellForCongress.com if this makes sense to you, and tell your friends to do that. Vote on Election Day, and tell your friends to vote on Election Day. And send an email to me if you want to help me cover the polls. JerryTrudellForCongress.com. Thank you all very much.
And thank you, sir. Republican Mark Donka, number 3.
I have a question for Vermont. How long is too long to be in Congress? if you've not accomplished what you set out to do in 8 years, there's a problem, which is why I believe in term limits. It's time for fresh ideas in Congress, and that's one of the reasons I wish to go to Washington. The current Congress has an approval rating of 15%. No one could keep their job if they had a 15% approval rating, but we keep sending these people back. The Republicans will probably take back the Senate in November, which will give me a head start and distinct advantage to pass fiscally responsible legislation that will help us get out of our $18 trillion debt under control. $18 trillion is what we are in debt. Guess what? The Democrat solution is to this: raise the taxes. There are two sides to every debt scenario: cutting waste and promoting jobs. The federal government needs to get out of your back pocket and let businesses thrive. Thank you.